for organizing this. Oh, cool. Got it. And yeah, I thought I'd set everything up, but it's been around about a year and a half since I was in an actual lecture theatre. So this is sort of exciting and not so exciting that it doesn't work. Let's see, new share. No, that should actually work. There we are. I was wanting my face in the corner somehow, but nah, I'll have to get rid of that. Let's see. That's meeting is being recorded. That's nice. Okay. This reminds me of actual lectures. So about 5 minutes of stuffing around with the. Okay. Well, you're spared my face, which is nice for me. But you're not spared my voice, which would be even nicer. I'll try to get rid of this as well, just so that it doesn't. I've got a little thing up the top. Let's see, hide floating meeting controls. Yay, awesome, cool. Okay, so yeah, thanks again for inviting me, MathSoc, also last year with the lovely panel. That was really cool. And here I get to have the pleasure of talking about stuff that is dear to my heart, but also something that you don't often get to do, which is just sort of a free form. Yeah, could you talk about something? Yeah, sure, I'd love to talk about something, and then I choose what I'd love to talk about. The title is 3 Nice Duality Theorems. So they are bits of mathematics that I really love and that have had some impact on the way I've sort of got through mathematics and my career and so forth. But it's, at the same time, I'd also like to give you just a little bit of life story, bits of advice here and there that yeah, might be useful or at least entertaining, if not. So duality theorems, that's a very, I mean, this is not like a concept that's in mathematics really. It's just what I've called them because they are duality theorems in various certain senses. So life story, when I was a kid, I was good at maths and stuff like that, nerd, but never thought I'd be a mathematician. I wanted to be an inventor. And then later on, I got very serious as a teenager and wanted to know the deep secrets of the world. So philosophy or physics or something like that. And then I thought, but I do like stuff that's pretty as well. So maybe I should go into architecture or study that instead. But then I thought, okay, maybe keep it real and go into maybe physics and then do maths on the side. But I found very quickly that I was much, much better at maths than physics. And I enjoyed physics, but I was not very good at it. And maths, and the first couple of years, I was sort of thinking, yeah, this is cool. I like this. It's, the problems are good. I'm doing well. I was a terrible student in the first year or two, maybe because I wasn't sort of motivated. Nothing had caught my interest really. Calculus was great. Analysis was even better. Algebra was really cool until I hit sort of a ceiling where it wasn't cool anymore for some reason. And topology, I still don't understand. And, the sort of linear algebra was cool, number theory. But there was nothing really that gripped me until I met combinatorics and discrete math. That's yay. So then I really found something that I really enjoyed and I got really into it. And I had the courses combinatorics 1, 2, 3 in succession, getting harder and harder. And dwindling classes and getting more and more fun. This is just an example of the sort of stuff. I mean, it's a broad and sprawling field, discrete math and combinatorics. Like it includes graph theory, includes logic. Well, people debate on what it includes, but it's so many different things. But here's just a very lovely little theorem by Erdős and Sekeres. Paul Erdős, you know. Sekeres, you should know. Oh, are you hearing that too? Okay, I'm just going to ignore that. Someone's talking about random stuff in my headphone. But anyway, yeah, weird. But anyway, so Sekeres, that was George Sekeres. Paul Erdős was best friends with Paul and Esther Klein at the time. George and Esther, they got married. That's a lovely story in itself. They fled under the Second World War from Hungary via a couple of places, ended up at UNSW actually, not Paul Erdős, but he visited once or twice, and the Sekereses were here for a long, long time. It's a lovely story, but that's not the point of the talk. But just a little example here, if you have some numbers, a certain number of numbers, then, and they have to be different, then you can look at some of the numbers, like if you put them in sequence in a row, then there's either going to be a sequence of at least n plus 1 elements that's increasing, or a sequence of at least that size that's decreasing. So it's sort of got a pigeonhole flavor to it, and you can actually prove it via the pigeonhole principle, and there's a little challenge for you, but you can do it in other ways too. And just to give you an example, so if we've got that n is equal to 3, just a little example with 3 squared plus 1 integers. Here I've chosen them sort of at random. You could choose any integers. Then you say, okay, the theorem says that there's got to be at least 3 plus 1 numbers somewhere here that are increasing, or if not, decreasing, or maybe more. And you look at those and say, okay, I can't find 4 or more numbers that are increasing. So there isn't any increasing subsequence of that size, but so the theorem would say, okay, there's got to be at least 4 numbers that are decreasing. They don't have to be sequential. They might skip, but if you look at, for instance, 7, 4, 1, and 0, yay, we've got 4 numbers that do actually decrease, and that's what the theorem says there has to be. There could be more than 4, but there has to be at least 4 of one of these types of things. So this is just one of many, many elegant, simple little facts that are part of combinatorics. And it used to be just a sort of a scattering of facts back in the day, but now it's a whole theory and actually many, many theories. So I learned a whole lot about that sort of stuff and loved it. And when I say that the classes got smaller and smaller, like we started about 25 people. Next time combinatorics 2 was 10 people. Third, we're just 3 people, and the lecturer was in the back, mostly sleeping. And we 3 had to take turns to do the lectures. So, 1 hour lecture, your turn, your turn, your turn, my turn again. So that was brutal, but, we really did learn and appreciate. Sorry, I'm shouting at you. I don't have a cold, but do get a bit hoarse by all of this shouting. That's a theorem that you just saw there is a special case of a broader theorem called Dilworth theorem, which I'll just talk about because that leads us to the first of these duality theorems. So you might know what a partial order set is. There are some axioms there. You can think of it as ordering things or people or whatever in some sort of way. Like, for instance, all of us could be a set of things, that set P there, ordered by maybe height or something. So you might be taller than me and you might be taller than you. So you're taller than me, so there's transitivity. You can't both be taller than each other unless you have the same height and you're at least as tall as yourself. So those basic natural properties define these partial sets, but you can also think of it in terms of these pictures here. There's a bunch of things, like we could be people on those dots, and this is smaller than that because we can go up from here to there along an upward line. But it's also smaller than this one here because you can go along this and this line to get from here to there. So this thing is smaller than that. And just to give you a couple of like examples or math examples, if we got the numbers 2, 3, 10, whatever, just some numbers, and we order them by divisibility, so it just doesn't have to be the usual sense of bigness or tallness or whatever, then 2 is usually smaller than 3, but in terms of divisibility, 2 isn't smaller than 3, and 3 is not taller than 2 because 2 doesn't divide it, but 2 does divide 10. So here we're saying that 2 is smaller than 10, and of course smaller than 40 and so forth. 3 is smaller than 30 and 60, but it's not smaller than 60, even though, 40, even though 40 is drawn higher up. We can't go upwards along lines from 3 to 40. So 3 is not smaller than 40. So I hope that makes sense. Please ask if it doesn't. Also those, by the way, it's lovely to see all of you here, but it's lovely to be talking to you, all of you who are just listening, and wish I could have shown my face, be a little bit personal, but sorry about that. But if you do have any questions, please do write in the chat and make this more of a discussion, especially, this is not about the maths alone, it's also about, well, anything really. Oh, sorry about this. Okay, so here's another example. Just a bunch of shapes. So here are sets. There's a set with a triangle, a set with a square, set with like a triangle and some circles there. And here it's ordered by subset inclusion. So these two things are included in the sets of these things above it. So the triangle and the double circle are smaller than the other stuff above it. But we have, for instance, that the triangle is not smaller than the square because, well, that square, the set containing the square doesn't contain the triangle, and so forth. Does this all make sense so far? Some of you have seen this a billion times, some of you haven't. Awesome. Cool. So now that we have talked about what a poset is, one of the very important things about these things is the substructures that are called chains and anti-chains. A chain is what you think it was. It's just a chain of things that gets bigger and bigger. So this could be us ordered by height. So at the bottom, there's someone, some short ass there, and then there's a bigger person and a bigger person and so forth. So they're all related to each other. Any two of these people are either bigger or smaller than each other. Then you got the opposite of this, the anti-chains, where none of the elements here, the red ones here, are bigger than each other. So you don't have that these dots here are bigger or smaller than each other. And these two types of structures are really fundamental to partially ordered sets, and you could say a lot about your partial orders in terms of these two structures here. So we're going to do that. And so if we have a couple of examples here, just to say here, if you can see, so from this slide to this slide, you can see in the middle of the picture, there's a chain with 4 elements. And we could have smaller chains, like here's one with 3, here's another one with 3, here's one with 2. And I point this out just so that you can see that the bottom element is smaller than the top element. They don't have to, you know, we can go upwards along this line and this line to get from one to the other. And why am I using my finger, the screen? Because half of you, maybe most of you, can't actually see it. Oh, there we go. If my stylus had worked, then see, much better. Here I've got this thing is smaller than this thing because we can go from here to there and so forth. Again, 1.5 years of not being in an actual auditorium is a bit rusty, but hopefully it'll return by the end of this seminar. So this is a chain as well, and of course we can just have chains with just a single element or no elements. They are chains as well. Anti-chains, here's an example of it. So here we have 2 elements that are not bigger or smaller than each other. Here's another one. I think I pointed that one out before. We can't go from this one here. Whoa, there's a bit of lag from here to there. Whoa. So those 2 elements are not bigger than each other. So that's an anti-chain as well. And here's an example of a very special case where we just have a single element, which that's both a chain and an anti-chain sort of trivially. And so is the empty set where you don't have anything at all. So here comes Dilworth's theorem. So if you want to cover all of the elements with chains, they could be disjoint. It doesn't actually matter whether they're disjoint or not. Then you need at least this number here, that number capital M. That's the maximal size of an anti-chain. So you need at least that number of disjoint chains. And it turns out that's exactly the number you need to cover the whole thing. And I'll show you an example just to see what we're talking about. So for instance, if we just had one chain, so that one there, it's rather big, but it doesn't cover everything. Like there are 2 elements that are not covered by. But if I have 2 chains, then yay, suddenly I've covered everything. I've got this chain and this chain. And now we've covered all 6 of the dots there. So the smallest number of chains that I need to cover everything is 2. And the theorem says that that's got to be the same number as the largest size of an anti-chain. And if you look at the picture, then, you know, we can't do any better than 2. We can't have 3 dots that are not bigger or equal to each other. So that's Dilworth's theorem. And if you think of it, if you have an anti-chain like this one here or this one there, then any chain can't pass through it, can't cover more than one element, because then they would be related. So you need for every anti-chain, you need that many, or the size of that anti-chain, you need that many chains to cover it, or more. But this theorem here says, rather non-trivially, that you need exactly that amount. Take the biggest anti-chain you can find, see how many things are in it, and then that's the smallest number of disjoint chains. And yay, and it's this lovely thing where you've got the maximal thing of something exactly reaches the minimal of something else. Or you could say it's sort of like the obvious necessary condition is actually sufficient as well. And it's actually sort of tricky to prove. Here's a tough challenge. Try to prove that without cheating, without Googling or whatever. It'll take you, well, some of you might just do it in a second. Definitely not me. I think if I hadn't seen this stuff before, I might take several days, a week or something. I don't know. But I'm slow, so unlike hopefully you. So yeah. Okay, and so forth. What do we say? Oh yes, there's a dual of this where we just swap the chains and anti-chains, and we're asking the same thing. How many anti-chains now instead of chains do we need to cover everything? And well, it's pretty much the same thing. The smallest number of anti-chains that we need to cover everything is the biggest size of a chain. And the funny thing here is that I can show you the proof very simply by this algorithm. So here's the biggest size of a chain 4. So here's a chain with size 4, which we can't do any bigger. So the theorem says that we should be able to cover everything with 4 anti-chains. And we can do that just by peeling off the top layers. So take the two biggest things, the maximal elements there, and remove them. Then we're left with just a smaller poset where we've got just one layer, so to speak, sorry, one element in the layer, and keep doing that. So if we look at the next maximal things, they would be these and so forth. So it does keep removing layers, and that's it. At every step, you're removing one element of the chain, and when there's no more chain left, well, then you've got all the anti-chains, and so that's super easy. And then the question is, wait a second, these two theorems here, Dilworth's and the dual, they are completely symmetric in their formulation. Like we just swap chains and anti-chains. So, could it be that for partial orders, if you have a partial order with some chains and anti-chains, could you maybe reverse their roles and get a new partial order? And the answer is no, it can't be. And that sort of demonstrates why, because it's actually really hard to prove Dilworth's theorem. Well, not really, but it's a lot harder to prove Dilworth's theorem than its dual. So there's some asymmetry going on here, even though there's a lot of symmetry going on here as well. And then the interesting bit becomes to say just exactly where does the symmetry stop and where does the interesting asymmetry start. So the first fact up there, Dilworth's theorem, is harder to prove than its dual. And so we can't exactly completely interchange these two, but when we can, that's a special class of posets called permutation posets. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that's a really good question. So why is the super easy one proved so much, from 50 to 71? There's 21 years of people just saying, oh yeah, that's a cool theorem and we can use it for stuff, but no one really, at least publicly, wrote down the very, very easy dual. I don't know, but my guess is that people were looking at different things at the time. They were very much looking at the applications of Dilworth's theorem and, as we'll see, Hall's marriage theorem here, and logistics. This was very much about using it for transport and scheduling problems and stuff, very industrial, and so it wasn't so theoretical. So maybe people returned to the theory back when things got a bit more abstract in the 60s with mathematics and sort of the flows of application and pure maths and applied maths sort of go in waves culturally. That's my guess, but it is weird. It's very weird. And second guess, but I don't know what you'd say to it, is that maybe it was so simple and obvious that no one wrote it down. But I don't think so, because it's a beautiful theorem in its own right, and it's very interesting, the symmetry. So I don't know. I mentioned this marriage theorem. You're supposed to not say marriage theorem. So but I do, because it was a lovely story back in the day. It was by Frobenius in 1917. So this is a theorem more than a century old. And then it was, now it's called Hall's theorem, but that's not a great name because Hall's got many theorems. So Hall's marriage theorem could be a good thing, but that's unfair to Frobenius. So what do you call it? So I just call it the marriage theorem. Anyway, so let's think about a tiny little village somewhere in the cold Europe, and then spring comes. Yeah, the snow clears and everyone's happy. And then you got some people that say, okay, you're girls and you're boys, you got to marry. Then the boy, but they do get some choice. There are some restrictions. Polygamy is not okay in that old village, but the girls there say, okay, I want to, I might be okay with this boy. And unfortunately, you see over up there in the far right corner, that poor guy, no one likes him, so he's quite sad. But then you ask, could we actually give one boy to all of the girls so that no sharing? Okay, well, the obvious condition would be that there are enough boys to go around. So there are 4 girls and 5 boys. Yeah, that's pretty good. But wait a second. If you look at the first 3 girls, they really like the first 2 boys and they don't like anyone else. So there are only 2 girls for 3 boys. So that doesn't work. So whenever you have a bunch of girls, there's got to be at least that many boys. That's obvious. But it turns out that that's enough. If that obvious thing is true, then we can actually, it turns out, not too complicated way, find a way of assigning boys to the girls, and everyone's happy, hopefully, unless they, it's a rather small village, so maybe you got to live with what you got. But anyway, that's a different story, and that was 100 years ago, and so forth and so on. the reason to show that is that that's actually equivalent to Dilworth's theorem. And this is just a slight change of perspective, which opens up a broad array of other combinatorics. And look, as I say, there are literally hundreds of different subtopics in combinatorics, and I don't have time to go into it all. But that was the sort of thing that I was looking at, and a lot of other things when I was in my undergraduate years and getting really into it and trying to avoid topology and a couple of other things which I really sucked at. And by the time I got to the end of my undergraduate, after the first 4 years, I was thinking, well, I'd like to do a PhD. Well, actually, yes, I would like to. I didn't know what a PhD was, but I knew there was. It sounded fun and cool, and I wanted to keep doing it, and I didn't know what else to do. But also, it was that I was driven by shame and fear. In my very first year, the very first big university party, our mentors had taken us along, shown us the ropes for the university and tried to put us into classes and to, socializing or whatever. And I still have this shame of the first year party, big, about 10,000 people party. And I was just very, very, very drunk and saying to my mentors, I'm going to get a PhD. And they say, yeah, of course you are. But it's actually sort of hard, and, don't be too disappointed if you don't. No, I'll show you. And then I woke up the day, oh, no, what did I say? That was so embarrassing. Why was I like that? And but that was very good, because that shame drove me for 4 years. Every time I sort of slacked off a bit, then I could, haul up that shame and embarrassment and say, well, okay, damn it, now I have to do it. So, use the emotions, fear, shame, whatever you need, they can be useful. So, and actually, I mean that sort of in a funny, humorous, but also somewhat serious way. You've got all these different types of emotions, and use them appropriately. It doesn't have to be in the standard ways. So anyway, back to Dilworth's theorem and the first duality theorem, which we still haven't got to, but we will now. We have partial orders with chains and anti-chains, and I'm going to have a little magic trick, so pay attention. It's very simple. I'm asking you, what's the biggest size of one chain? Well, by now you've looked at this thing for so long. What do you reckon? Yeah, exactly right, 4. Thanks. And now if you're allowed to have 2 chains, well, we saw that it could cover everything. So the union of them, or everything that we can cover, is got to be 6. All of the 6 things, for instance, like that. In fact, the only way you can get it like that. Now we're going to ask the same things for the anti-chain. So what's the biggest size of an anti-chain? Yes, exactly right. And so that's 2, for instance, here. Now, if you're allowed to have 2 anti-chains, how many elements can they cover all in all? What do you reckon? Yeah, exactly right. We could, for instance, have for that bottom layer and the top layer there, they cover 2 each. All in all, they covered 4 elements. And we continue. So if you're allowed to have 3 anti-chains, well, then you can cover 5. And if you have 4, then we cover everything. Yeah, we're done. And so forth. Now, those numbers there, if I draw them as little boxes, so here I draw the first 2 numbers, 4 and 6, as these boxes here. So what I'm doing here is draw that 4 as a row of 4 boxes, and then I look at the difference between 4 and 6 and add that difference, which is 2, to the next row. So there I have a tiny little shape, and I do the same thing with the anti-chains. I've got 2 there, so there are 2 in the first row, and then there are the next number there. The anti-chain number was 4, so the difference is 2, so I have 2 there. And then we've got 5 and 6, the difference is 1 and 1. And so what? Well, do you notice anything? Yeah. They're the same shape, just flipped around, transposed. And that's exactly what Green's theorem says. And you say, oh, well, that's nice, and that's, sort of cool, and so what? Well, I'll show you what. Look at this. So for instance, the maximal size of an anti-chain is 2. Remember that was part of Dilworth's theorem? So if we look at those 2 boxes there, well, that's got to be, according to this theorem, the number of rows, or there. And that's the number of rows for how many chains are needed to cover everything. So that's exactly Dilworth's theorem, just by looking at the top row of this shape there and flipping it around and saying, cool. So we need 2. We have to use, or we can use 2 chains to cover everything. And okay, we could have looked at the top row of this shape instead. And then you get the dual of Dilworth's theorem. And then you could have looked at many more things, not just the top row. There's a lot of information going on there. And the beautiful thing is, as you can just see on the picture, I mean, it's so simple. It's just a very, very symmetric relationship. And yet I told you that there's not perfect symmetry between chains and anti-chains. So there's a lot of symmetry going on, and yet not completely when we've got. So it's a fascinating theorem, and it's a vast generalization of Dilworth's theorem, and therefore of Paul Ehrlich and George Sekresch's theorem, and so forth. So this is and I wrote a Green's theorem is a little bit unfair, actually, because there are two people. Green actually has about 4 theorems which were proved in about 2 or 3 years when he was a postdoc at MIT. So it's sort of cool but confusing. Maybe it should have been called the duality theorem, but no one knows what sort of duality we're talking about, so that's a bit confusing. But the reason that I point that out is that Sergei Fomin, a lovely guy, when he was 19 in the Soviet Union, there wasn't a lot of correspondence between the West and the Soviet Union in terms of research, not even mathematical. There was a tiny bit, but it took a lot of years for the journals to go from one direction to another. So he didn't realize that Green was doing this stuff, and he did it himself and got to the big academy in Moscow, and he got a good career, and then he came to MIT later and, oh yeah, you did that too, awesome. And then they did a lot of stuff together. But my task was then, and here I suppose my story is that I started my PhD and got to MIT, and one of the first sort of projects that my supervisor gave me was, could you please maybe write an article about this sort of stuff together with Sergei Fomin? And we did, and we wrote a beautiful article because he took all the crap that I wrote and made it nice. This was my first year of PhD. I didn't know how to write, but I did some good maths, so I worked hard. Yeah, I was in awe of going to MIT. I tried to find a supervisor in my own home place. The guy taught those combinatorics courses, and he said, "Nah, what? No, I'm too busy. I've got a firm on the side." Oh, okay, well, great. Hey, wait a minute. Can you maybe be my official supervisor? And I won't bother you except for a signature now and then. And then I go out in the world and find someone else that does the actual supervision. And I say, okay, cool. And I ask, well, okay, do you have any advice? I know I wasn't going to pester you, but do you have any advice on how to find such an external supervisor? And he said, Google. Okay, but it turned out to be really, really good because I was clueless. And sometimes it's very useful to be clueless. So I was saying, oh, who's the best in the field and who's the most famous and cool? And then I got like 8 people and they all said, yeah, sure, come. And I had money from my own institution. There's no paperwork. It would be unofficial. So they just said, yeah, free work. And, I like to. And that's one thing that's worth knowing. If you do email the top people in mathematics and in general, but especially mathematics where there's not a lot of politics, especially when you get to the top, people are so lovely and friendly. Don't be in awe of the big professors because they are some of the nicest people. They don't have to compete. They are already at the top and they like to, get help and so that they don't have to do so much work, but they like to create community and to support young people or, any people. So don't hold back. Anyway, but I was a bit in awe of MIT and this guru, the father of combinatorics, Giancarlo Rota was called. And I saw him just for an hour every 2 weeks. And he'd say, oh, yeah, so how did it go with the previous problems that I posed you last fortnight? And say, well, I was really nervous because I got nowhere. And I felt so stupid. And I'd say, well, I did this tiny little result, this tiny, but I really got nowhere. And he said, wow, that's cool. That's really cool. Oh, that's fascinating. And then he'd post me something again, which then and after about 3-4 months, I realized, what? He's posing me unsolved problems that have been unsolved like for a decade or 50 years, a century. No one can solve them. So that was rather rough, but did make me work very hard. And but unfortunately, he died. He died at the end of or near the end of my year there. And that hit everyone. He was such a lovely guy. Only 66 in his sleep. It was all very untraumatic, except for everyone around him. And so I had to look elsewhere and I contacted one of the other people, another guru in London, Peter Cameron, and then I changed tack to something completely different, which I'll get to now. But there was one lesson in all of that. He died a happy person, but it was on the way down, I think, because he was very smart, of course. He worked very hard. He had motivation to try to make a mark in the field and help people and etc. But I saw that, all of you who, are smart and driven could do the same too at a cost. And then the question is, do you want to do that or not? You can do it. You can dedicate your life to doing this. He'd been married, got divorced. And, that must have been in his mid-40s, never got someone again. And he was happy. But as he grew older, some of his old friends were dying, and he was turning more into an icon than a person for a lot of the young students. So they were just thinking, wow, so you could see that the personal connection. He might have ended up a really lonely man, and and that might have been okay for him. It might be okay for you, but I realized, oh wow, okay, getting right to the top is not actually a good idea necessarily. Definitely for me, because at some point you're among all sorts of smart people, and then chances are very unlikely that you get to the top. And why be at the top anyway? The views are maybe nicer, but why kill yourself on the way? The view is pretty good here too, And so, yeah, ambition is good, but a bit of moderation and just a bit of strategic thinking. Where do I actually want to land, and where do I want to go? But anyway, over to London, new direction, and my new supervisor said, okay, I'll try to find something sort of similar, but I don't really know what you are doing over there, so this is new. And still within combinatorics, but now it's to do with coding theory as well, and in particular, the intersection of these, where the central thing that I was to look at was called the Tut polynomial. And for many years, I was just doing this by myself, and it was sort of a bit lonely. No one really was interested in it, and I got rejections when I tried to publish my work, and people were a bit disparaging even here in this community around Australia and so forth. So it was sort of lonely work, but I did good work, and was mainly looking at Green's theorem, which is not the same Green theorem. It's the same Green, but it's a different theorem from the same year even, which is confusing. There are 3 from the same year, Green's theorems, but it was saying how this Tut polynomial thing it said something about weight enumerators, which I'll very briefly introduce now soon. But this would have just been a very nice, interesting fact that some parts of coding theory, which people thought were really algebraic, well, turned out to be quite combinatorial. And that was a shock to combinatorialists. And the coding theory people said, we don't give a damn, because we're not interested in combinatorics. But they got to be more interested when Green was able to use that result to give a super elegant, super short proof of what's called the MacWilliams identity by Jessie MacWilliams. She proved it back in '63 in her thesis, and it's like a cornerstone of coding theory. And then it turned out that by Ivan Dursma, he showed that the Tut polynomial can also be used to prove another duality theorem. And these are the second and third duality theorems that I'm going to be talking about, which is this lovely and elegant theorem as well. So I've been looking at that sort of stuff and done a lot of work on it, sort of taking all the low-hanging fruit and then the not so low-hanging fruit and so forth for many years. And anyway, just to tell you a little bit about what they're about. So we've got a linear code. So that's a subspace in the example here. I've just drawn 3 vectors, row vectors as a matrix, and think of the span of them. So all of the linear combinations here in this example, that's keeping things simple. So over the binary field, just so you can either take each of those 3 rows, multiply it by 0 or 1, and then add them together. So then you get 8 different vectors, or we call them code words. And then what can you do with it? Well, you could do all sorts of algebra, but this is encoding theory. So we're going to look at it differently and look at the weights and supports of these. So the weights, we're trying to measure how big these code words are. And it's a really simple way of doing it. We're just counting for each of these vectors here. How many zeros are there? Or more to the point, how many non-zeros are there? Here it's, because I'm dealing with binary numbers, it's just how many ones are there. So for instance, there are no ones in the first one. There are 2 here, there are 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, and then 4, 4, 4, and so forth. Does this make sense? Cool. Awesome. So we're just counting the number of ones for the weights, or if we were dealing with another field, the number of not zeros. Now the supports are a bit more sophisticated than the weights. They're not asking how many of the entries are non-zero. They're asking which of the entries are non-zero. So for that, we need some coordinates. So I'm going to label these coordinates 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Whatever, the labels don't matter. And now I'm going to ask again, so which of these coordinates are non-zero? And in the first case, there are none of them. So we have an empty set. So the support of that 0 vector is 0. But when we get to the next vector, we've got that whoa, it's very laggy. So this entry and this entry, they're in the positions number 1 and 3. So the support is just going to be the set containing 1 or 3, or I'm going to be lazy and just write 1, 3. And you can see 2, 3, and the next one's going to be 4, 5. and 1, 2, and everything except 2, everything except 1, everything except 3, and so forth. So all of this information, the weights and supports of these vectors, that's really important for coding theoretical purposes, for instance, for error correction. Like if you have an error correcting code, we want to send some information and protect it from errors, then these sort of things, weights and supports, tell you very briefly how good the code is going to be for that purpose, for correcting. And there are many, many other types of codes that do different things than just correcting. And these weights and supports are sometimes all you need. You don't even need to use the code word sometimes to know a lot about the code. So, so that's what that's what we're going to look at. And we're also going to look at the dual thing, because we need some duality here. And that's going to be the dual vector space or the dual code here. It's I've written it up as a little matrix again, but if you look at the linear combinations of those two rows, you get now 4 code words. And these are exactly the code words which are orthogonal to these code words over there, which have a 0 dot product. So this is the way we define dual codes. And we've got one more thing to define, which is the weight enumerator. And that's exactly if you take the weights here and you just say, okay, how many weights are there of weights, or how many weights are 0, how many weights are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you just list it up as a polynomial. You could have listed it as a vector, but that's essentially the same. You've got 1 weight of weight 0. You've got 0 weights of weight 1. You've got 4, these 4 here, these weights of 2. And then you've got 3 weights of weight 4. So this is just a very simple little polynomial, sort of just like a vector, which says how many different weights of different sizes do you have? And that's, again, one of these important parameters for codes. And now, okay, I said that this was the last definition for now, but I'll just tweak it. There's half a definition more. Take that weight enumerator and homogenize it. So instead of just having like z's there, z's here, we're going to have 2 variables so that each of the terms in the polynomial has the same degree, in this case 5. So this is going to be the homogeneous weight enumerator. So here, instead of so here we had 1 times something, 1 times y to the power of 0. So I add x to the power of 5, and here I had z squared. I replaced the z by a y squared, and then I multiply by x to the power of 3, just so that the total degree of this term is 5, and I do the same there. So it's just a rewriting of this polynomial. But the reason that I do it is that then I can express this second duality, MacWilliams identity, in a really nice way, like this. So if you know the weight enumerator of your code, in other words, you know how many weights of different sizes are there for the code, then you can take this shortcut, which is beautiful, and just evaluate in this polynomial, and you get the weight enumerator of the dual code. And the reason that that's cool is that you don't have to first take the code, and then you got the weight enumerators. You can find the weights there, and then find the dual code, which is a lot of work. And if we have big codes, there might be billions of code words, and then find the weight enumerator of that. You can just take a shortcut. If you just know that tiny little bit of information, there's still useful information about the weights, then you can find the similar information for the dual code. And it's used all the time in coding theory, sometimes for showing that codes can't exist if you're looking for them, and so forth and so on. So I was looking at this quite a lot, this identity, and generalizing it, trying to understand it better in combinatorial terms. And again, I was working by myself, and it was sort of lonely work. But then I thought, okay, look, I do know one person in the world that's doing something similar. He wrote something about 5 years ago, Keisuke Shiromoto. So I sent one of my papers to him, and he got all excited, just like I was excited about his paper. And yay! And within very, very short time, we'd excitedly written up 1 or 2, 3 papers, and then got them into shape. And that was a very, very happy and fruitful production. And so now we were 2. It wasn't just me. So that went on for a couple of years, and but still sort of a little bit of a lonely process. And we were clearing away a lot of the low-hanging fruits, or not so low, now having to climb the tree a bit, and sort of reaching a saturation point where we'd sort of done everything that was sort of natural to do. And we're sort of looking for other things to do, which I'll get to as well. Before I do that, though, let's have a small example of this theorem here. Like we had the code from before, given by that matrix there, and the dual codes, which we've seen before. But in this case, of course, when we know what the code is and what the code words are, implicitly, we can just find the weight or enumerator of these 2, and that's all good. But now imagine that these codes were really big, and you didn't know what the code words were, you just knew what the weight enumerator of the, let's say the first one was, well, you can find the second one just by evaluating it using this MacWilliams identity, and then you get it, and yay, and yeah, it's useful. But anyway, yeah, so we were doing this for a while, and it was getting to the point where we're sort of running out of stuff to do, and we're seeing, oh, okay, maybe we can apply our results, and that was actually cool, and another little life lesson. So we saw, okay, we've got these applied results about these big codes that people don't really know much about. They don't sometimes even know whether they exist or not, but they would have these sort of properties. And can we calculate some things, for instance, weight enumerators for these big codes? No one's been able to do it, but now we have some theoretical tools that we've discovered that might help us do that. So I wasn't much of a programmer at the time, and I used Maple to try to apply. And then okay, this is going too slowly. This will take years and years and years to finish. So I contacted an old high school friend who's good at C, and my dad who's good at Fortran. And my dad doesn't know anything about this sort of stuff, but he can program. And I had my messy Maple, and I showed it to both of them and say, go. And and they for the next 2-3 weeks they were furiously trying to compete with each other. My code is quicker than yours. No, mine is quicker than yours. And that's a friendly competition. Meant that we actually cracked the problem within about 2-3 weeks, and then we wrote it up. I wrote it up, and we got it published. And from start to finish, it was 3 months of really, really happy work. And it just showed me, look, if you can turn your work into fun. And especially if you can, you don't have to get, big professors or whatever. If you can get friends and family, into it, then that's not always possible, but sometimes it is, and do it. And conversely, if you don't have friends and family who want to do that, then make your colleagues and, students and mentors or whatever, turn them into friends if you can. I'm not so great at that because I'm shy and reclusive, but that's, take my advice, even if I don't do it properly myself. Anyway, so that brings us sort of a couple of years forward to sort of the last parts of this research, which was looking at one of the beautiful duality theorems in coding theory, Bayes' theorem, which I've talked about before. And I was thinking, how can we make this a lot more powerful? How can we extend it? So that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So linear codes, as we've seen before. Now, instead of looking at code words themselves and their supports, and their weights, I'm going to be looking at subcodes. So here, the linear code had like the rows there were the elements of the basis of it. So the dimension is 3. So we've got subcodes of, well, of course, 0 dimension, but 1, 2, and 3. So if we look at each of those subcodes, like here are the one-dimensional subcodes, they basically just, because we're dealing in binary, just all of the non-zero code words. And if we look at the weights of them, we found them already. They were 2, 2, 2, 4, 4, 4. So that's nothing different. But when we look at the two-dimensional subcodes, now they're spanned by 2 vectors. It turns out that there are 7 of them as well. And now the way that we're going to look at the weights is we're going to look at each of the columns and ask, are you 0 or not? Are you the 0 column? And if you're not a 0 column, we count you. So in the first instance here, we've got 3 non-zero columns. So the weight is 3. In the second one, there's 4 non-zero columns and so forth. And of course, for the 3-dimensional subcode, there's just the code itself, and you can see that it doesn't, all of the 5 columns are non-zero, so the weight is 5. And what we're going to do with those numbers is look at these higher weights up here. So in dimension 1 for D1, we look at these numbers 2 and 4 and take the smallest, so that's 2. And for the 2-dimensional codes there, we look at the weights there, that's 3, 4, 5, the smallest is 3. And for D3, well, there's only one subcode, it's got weight 5, so the smallest is 5. And we do the same sort of thing for the dual code, and it turns out that you get 2 and 5 for that. And then we're going to do this, define some sets U and V. So U is just the set of these D vectors, you write them up, 2, 3, and 5. The set V is going to be, well, n plus 1. Here, n is the number of columns or the number of coordinates, which is 5. So we've got n plus 1, which is 6, minus these numbers here, 2 and 5. So we've got 6 minus 2, which is 4, 6 minus 5, which is 1. So that's 1 and 4. And look at that. How beautiful is that? Why? Do any of you see why that's cool? If you look at those 2 sets there. Yeah, exactly. If you add those 2 sets together, so to speak, if you take the union, it's the numbers from 1 to 5. All of the numbers, they don't overlap, and they fill out all the numbers from 1 to 5, the total set of coordinates. And that's true in general. That's Way's duality theorem. Beautiful theorem and actually quite useful, it turns out. But it means that if you know these higher weights for the code, then you know them for the dual code as well. So it's very much similar in flavor to MacWilliams Identity, just about higher weights instead. And I've been working a lot with this sort of thing and keep thinking, my intuition really tells me that it's got something to do with Green's theorem, with partial orders and stuff. It's so like, it's just on the tip of my mind, you know, but it's been on the tip of my mind for about 20 years since, I don't know. So I still haven't figured out the connection, if there is one. But please join me if you would like to help me solve this. Anyway, so I was looking at that. You've got Way's duality. I was looking at then a graph version of this, which I thought of including, but I've already gone way over time, so sorry about that. You can generalize this to more combinatorial things. And then once you've done that, then you can apply it to many more things, transversals, which has got to do with matchings, as in Hall's marriage theorem. And then you can generalize much further and much further and further and further, it turns out. And this has opened up a whole field, which we opened it up and we went some of the steps, but at that time I was sort of getting fed up. This had been really hard work, mostly lonely work, and mostly, you know, people just didn't really give it much respect or attention. So I was thinking, I've had enough. You know, the fruits are getting high. No one gives a damn. I'm proud of the work and it's good stuff, but time for something new. So then I was looking around, what else can I do in combinatorics or applied stuff? So I did various fun projects and still I'm doing that. The irony though was that that was exactly the time where suddenly people said, oh, this is cool stuff, yay. And, you know, so damn. So now I'm a pioneer, a reluctant pioneer in this field, and I'm still, you know, got one sort of toe in it because, you know, it's a waste of opportunity not to do that. But there are much smarter people doing this now, and you know. But the nice thing is these old results are getting recognition and citations because you know, we're measured in various ways about you know, how important and our research is. Anyway, so. One tiny little thing that sort of ties the first duality and this together, and I know that I've gone way over time, is back to posets. And one more thing, actually two more things to define. Ideals of a poset. So if you have a set of things, the ideal of it is everything in the set and below it. So for instance, if we have A and B there, being the set A, then those two elements and everything beneath it form the ideal of A and B. Okay, that's the first definition. The second is just this. If you have a poset, flip it upside down. That gives you another poset. That's called the dual. Okay, no more definitions. So here's the poset P and its dual. And now if we go back to Way's theorem, but now we do something sort of interesting. We look at the coordinates that I'd got before, 1 to 5 here. And now I'm going to order them in some way via partial order. It doesn't matter. I've just chosen some random partial order here. You could choose anything. So here I've chosen 5 to be biggest, and then 2 to be bigger than 4, and 1 and 3 and 4 to be at the bottom, so to speak. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the weights again, except I'm not going to completely do it in the same way. For instance, over let's choose this one here, the second one. The weight is now going to be 3, which is sort of weird, because I'm going to ask, okay, which of these positions or which of these columns are non-zero? Okay, that's position number 2 and 3. And then I'm going to look at the partial order 2, 3, and then I'm going to look at the ideal of 2 and 3. So everything that's beneath 2 and 3, including, so it's 2, 3, and 4. 3 elements. So that's going to be the weight. And here, this weight, what? Is it 5? It should be 2, shouldn't it? No, because here we've got 4 and 5. But 5 was bigger than everything else, so we've got to include everything else. So there are 5 things that 4 and 5 cover. So the weight is 5. So it's sort of messed up. We're messing things thoroughly up. But no matter what partial order you choose, and you can choose it, it's not given by the code or anything, then we have the same thing going on. We've got a poset version of Way's duality, and then you can extend that in many different ways as well. And that's one of the things that I was proud of, and I'm also ashamed of, because well, look, this is us coming with this result. And then there are 2 other people who also came with independently with their result, the same thing there from completely different ways. And the reason that it wasn't just one name, our name, is that I'm lazy and procrastinate, and sometimes I just get busy with other things and don't put proper priority to stuff. So sometimes it's worth moving fast and forward when you get to trendy mathematics. And I could have, we could have just had one name there 5 years before this. It's a bit embarrassing. But the flip side to that coin is sometimes that's not actually important, because it's actually really good that there are 3 names there, because each of these 3 approaches are actually really valuable. They say a lot about this sort of stuff from 3 different directions. So, and there was a long story that I was going to talk about that, but I realized that, so I've gone way over time. So I think I'll stop there. And I'll stop there. And thank you very much. I suppose there's one more thing to mention. The upshot of that was that I came here to UNSW in 2005. This was all around sort of when I had temporary positions, and then I got a permanent position in 2010, where I've been since. Abandoned this, but I'm still at UNSW in a different role, doing very different things. And yeah, I'm not quite sure where things are going to lead me, but you're more than welcome, and some of you are already joining me on this destinationless journey. I love combinatorics just as much as I did in the beginning, but I've sort of no longer got a fixed direction. I'm sort of going in different. So if you have a good direction to suggest, then let's play together. But sorry about going over time so much. There's not a lot of time for questions now, but do you have any questions? Oh yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. I'm happy to stick around. So I know some of you might not be able to, but let's see. Sorry, the technical mishaps. I'm happy that it wasn't worse. So, anyone? Thanks. Yeah. Mic's muted. And if you do want to use your mic, feel free to do that now if you want. And anyone have any questions, comments? If you don't ask something, you're in danger of me giving you unwarranted, just talking on, unasked for. No. Cool. That's cool too. Yes. Awesome question. Awesome that you asked it, and thank you. But also awesome because my awesome colleague Anita is in the room there. At our school, we have far too little combinatorics, in my biased opinion. We've got discrete math, we've got finite math, which is sort of half discrete, and we've got 3, 4, 1, 1. Yay, both of those courses. Awesome, the discrete math and codes and ciphers. We've got stuff that's sort of flavored in that direction. Algebraic methods and number theory, 3521. That's a great course as well. But then we really don't have anything sort of undergraduate level. We've got the graduate level of graph theory with awesome Catherine Greenhill. I think it's 5425. And then we also have combinatorics, which I loved. And but now Anita is excelling and doing far better at that. That's 5505, or is it 5055? Something like that, one of those two. So, and I really, really recommend those 2 courses, graph theory and combinatorics. Especially Anita is pretty cool at doing that. Last time she did it, she was inviting like top people in the field. Oh yeah, could you give a guest lecture and stuff like that? So that was pretty special. But yeah, it would be lovely to have more of this. And there is a chance that we might, because our course degrees in the whole faculty are being reviewed and overhauled a little bit. So maybe I'm hoping that, for instance, finite mathematics can just be scrapped and replaced by a quality combinatorics course. So hey, that would be cool. So I'm sort of nudging towards that, but we don't have any power. But what about yourselves? Do you have more combinatorics, say in or discrete math, graph theory, whatever, in computer science, for instance, or elsewhere? I think you've got algorithms. Yeah, cool. And did you enjoy that? Oh, good. Yeah. So moving outside of our school, there's a little bit more, but unfortunately over at Sydney Uni, there's not a whole lot. They're sort of much more algebra focused. There's a little bit out in Western Sydney. There's a really good guy there. But as you can sort of tell, in Sydney, we've got a strong combinatorics group, but it's not represented in the way that we'd like in our teaching. But on the other hand, I should mention now that everything is online, you can go to MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, Oxford every night, and go to their seminars, and they're free, open, and you should do that. I mean, they've got, all the world-class people. You don't have to travel there and sort of get a special invitation or whatever. You can just log on and, of course, there are many other, but it would be nice for a bit more in our school. Yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions? Yeah. So that's a really good question. So what is a code and why is it called a code? I mean, I said that the codes that I'd showed in the lecture are just vector spaces. So why not call them vector spaces? Be a normal human being. But people in algebra call them vector spaces. But people in coding theory who are looking at the same objects didn't care about the algebra. They just wanted to do things with them. So that could be error correction or compression or distributed storage or whatever. So their terminology evolved separately from the algebraists, and a little bit more general as well, because a code is just a bunch of vectors. And what's a vector? Well, it doesn't have to be constant length. It can just be, words with random symbols. So it's a very, very general thing that doesn't necessarily have any algebraic structure or whatever. And so there's a bit of generality and subtlety there that is part of the picture, but in general, it's just vector spaces. You usually look at linear codes. Well, I usually do, but yeah. Yeah, cool. Yeah, does MathSoc have any questions or anything at all? Life wisdom to impart. Yeah. Yeah, no, really awesome question. So if you are interested in combinatorics undergraduate, how do you get to learn more, and how do you connect with people? And as I said, people are really open to just sending them an email or whatever. And of course, there's YouTube and a whole lot of resources online now that are really good quality a lot of the time. So you don't need to, enroll in a course necessarily, but it can, of course, help. I think also it might be really happy for all of you to hear, and those, online, that when I was doing all of this, mathematics was something, you study, and it was, well, where I studied, it was quite unpopular. You go to a party and say, oh, so what are you doing? Oh, I'm studying whatever. And, oh, so what are you doing? I'm studying mathematics, and then they just leave. But once you start saying, I study a PhD in mathematics, oh, that's fascinating. I always hated maths, but you must be very smart, and whatever. Then you got to the job market and say, oh, you've got a PhD in maths. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, okay, great. See ya. We don't know what to use you for. You're overqualified. And if you have a master's in mathematics, well, that's very good. You're good at problem solving, but we'd like actual skills. But that was a long time ago in a different setting. And the good news is that everything's changed since then. And especially here in this school, there's it's got a really good reputation for education. If you have a UNSW maths degree, even if it's just, like you've taken a couple of courses and you're doing something else, computer science, physics, engineering, whatever, psychology, then industry is really aware that you've got some really good thinking skills. And the nature of jobs is very, very different too. It's getting very mathematical. Doctors, psychologists, everyone has to think in a much more mathematical way and actually do a little bit of statistics and other sort of stuff. So there's sort of a more there's a more mathematization flow of the nature of jobs in general. And if you look at the top jobs, like the career cast and higher times 200, the best jobs or worst jobs ranked sort of 200 jobs, then most of the top 10 jobs are as mathematicians, either as mathematicians, statisticians, data science, theoretical computer science of various types, actuarial, the high end of finance and so forth. But even that stuff sort of going more towards just general jobs being more mathematical. And And that's been the case for actually quite a long time here in Sydney. But now it's these rankings are more global, and so it's not just local. So the good news here is if you're doing a little bit of maths and computer science, maybe a little bit of statistics, you've got an awesome job and career in front of you. Don't worry about it. So the thing that's important is to focus on what you're actually good at, what you like, get good at that, and worry about the jobs later. They will be there. And don't get seduced by job hunters that are saying, oh yeah, you can replace your ramen by, an actual dinner now, because now you got like 60,000 a year. Whoa, and that might be great, but no, you're gold. You're worth a lot. And don't, they'll give you some shit job, and they just want to scam you quickly and run you through the mill. You'll be out of the door in a couple of years, trying to find something better and be a little bit wiser life. But I'd prefer that you didn't go through that trauma so quickly. And, you're actually worth something to a lot of people. And just stay your ground, see what's out there. And I'm not saying that you should have to do a PhD or anything, but what are your options, and not just act out of fear. Fear is good for, motivating yourself, but it's not good for, when it just makes you run away. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. And look, when I was starting my PhD, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I knew that I wanted to do something in combinatorics, and that was cool. Yeah, and contact top combinatorialists to see what they could suggest. And some supervisors might sort of test you how independent are you by saying, okay, you've got to come with a topic, but then you say, okay, sorry, I don't have one. Move on. Ask the next person and say, do you have some good topics? And then they might suggest something. And the onus should really be on them to suggest something, unless you have something that you're burning for already. Most people don't know, so don't worry about it. And it can be a little bit hard to find supervisors sometimes, but if you are doing well, then most research active staff members, they jump at the chance to get bright people to do their work for them. It's a bit of work mentoring and everything, but it pays off well. So also in that domain, you're attractive and wanted. Yeah. Yes. So in case you couldn't hear that online, there's a world-class researcher sitting right here offering her supervision. No, no, and Judy is. And please check out. Maybe can you send the link in the chat? There's a global. Okay. Judy will send the link to Andrew to a conference which you should check out. It's for students, no grown-ups in the room, so to speak, about combinatorics and all around the world. It's actually a really cool conference. It's very well organized, and good on you, Judy. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, both of you, both Andrews. I've got a couple of topics that I like, but they're a little bit vague. I think they're somewhere on the maths webpage. They are combinatorial. Hey, yeah, there's one about algebraic combinatorics. I'm not very good at algebra, so very often I get students to do like honors courses so that I can learn something about stuff. If it's sort of within my domain, but I like to learn more. So yeah, that's a sprawlingly big field. It could be a lot of things, but there's a lot of room for scope there. And the other one that I do know a lot about, but just like, is enumerative combinatorics in all its different flavors. And there's a lot of free room to explore there. So these topics are sort of very open and explorative. And if you like something particular, then I might be able to stitch some honors topic together for you. It's because I sort of left the main tree and just have gone out on my own sort of little adventures to try to find some new big like tree or mine to mine. It sort of left me in this position where I've become sort of a jack of all trades and master of none. Like I am master of a couple of things that I did in my previous incarnation in PhD years, postdoc years, and so forth. Two fields that I sort of made a mark in, but I've left them a little bit, and that leaves me in a bit of a awkward position that I welcome all students, except I don't really always have good topics for you. So that's a bit unfortunate, but I'm working on it. So, and please do contact me if you're interested. So, yeah. Thanks, Andrew, and lovely to see you, so to speak, virtually. Anyone else? Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
How many posets on a set of size K?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and that's so. How many posets are there with n disjoint chains of a given size? I think it was as well, and that's a beautiful type of question, a very sort of typical question in combinatorics that I like too. It's a part of enumeration, so. If you have these this sort of context, then you could ask, well, what do the posets actually look like that can be partitioned like this? Is there a lot of variation? Can we count them, and so forth? For that one, I think the answer might actually be sort of simple. I'm not sure, but I think it might be possible to answer by sort of inductively just saying, here are how many chains you're allowed to have, and then add up, but the constraint on the size of the chains might make it sort of partition-y. I don't know. What do you say, Anita? So how many posets have a certain size, like K, and have a minimal chain composition of size whatever? So I suppose that's the maximal size of an anti-chain, and so forth. What about you, Giovanna? Do you have any? And where are you? There you are, Isaiah. You two have been working with posets together with me. I don't quite know, but it feels like there might be some way of at least inductively maybe finding some recursive way to approach this enumeration. But yeah, I don't know. It's a lovely question. Yeah, do you have any ideas or? Mm. Yeah, it's got that sort of flavor. Yeah, Sterling. Yeah, Bell numbers, Sterling numbers. That sounds familiar. I mean, that could be familiar to this. Yeah. Of course, yeah, that's actually a good point too, because then the question comes also: are we talking about labeled or unlabeled, and up to isomorphism or not, and so forth. There's a whole that could be a whole whole field to study in itself. This question. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, thanks a lot. I should have said that, and it sort of was obvious from the slides to prompt me to say that. So um, here in the MacWilliams identity, for instance, you've got a a variable there which I didn't sort of just skipped over, which is Q. That's the size of the field. So all of this that I've been talking about for the binary example here is more general for finite fields. If we're dealing with infinite fields, suddenly there are too many vectors and it's a mess. But people, if you're doing actual coding theory and you want to do error correction, you generally just work with finite things, either finite fields or finite rings or whatever. So yeah, really good question. So MacWilliams identity and Wey's duality theorem are both valid in general for codes over finite fields. And the interesting thing there, I suppose, is that if you look at the MacWilliams identity here and Wey's identity there, I mean, they do involve the codes in question, but they don't actually involve them much, because here we've only got some very few parameters. We've got Q, which is the size of the field, and we've got K, which is the dimension of the code. And then everything else is just variables. So it's this transformation here, for instance, and the one by way, a very, very simple involutions, I suppose. Just transform one thing into another in a way that if you did it again, you got back to where you started, without any use of algebra or actually almost any information about the code, except for these very, very few parameters. So yeah, that's Hamming. So what's a Hamming weight for larger fields? That's a really good question. It explains a little bit why, a little bit the awkwardness that I was saying. Instead of just count the number of ones in each vector, I kept saying count the number of non-zero elements. So that's the way to generalize it for bigger fields. So instead of just counting the number of ones, we just count all the things that are not zero. And that's exactly the same for the bigger fields context. And then you can go beyond that. And actually, some of the stuff that we've done recently goes beyond Hamming weights and to rank metric codes and other things where instead of looking at supports being a set of coordinates, you have that they are labeled, the coordinates of your codes are labeled by subspaces themselves. And so that's that gets a bit gets a bit weird, but gets you some very, very general and powerful tools. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, and thank you, both online and offline. Thanks heaps for coming. It was a joy to see you all, especially in person.